Orwell said in 1933, technology makes it better, but it's going quicker backwards quicker. So here we are going backwards. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for your accommodation this evening. This is going to be an introduction. There you go. This is an introduction to common law. Just to touch against what Robert did earlier. The thing about history is that history is always his story. His story. So that's the victor wins or writes the outcome of whatever it was that they were using. So this is an introduction to common law. What is it good for? We don't have to run through it. If you to follow the screens at the beginning is the typical, the pyramid structure that we're all aware of. And so in preparing this, I was struck by how simple things really can be. And so at the apex of the pyramid, we have from a common law point of view, we have God, and then immediately below God, we have man. And man is built or created in the image of the Creator. So this is not about a religious aspect. This is about the hierarchy of control, if you like, or the hierarchy of the intention. And the intention was that that man is the creator. Sorry, man is man is created by God, and that's what common law is. He who creates controls. As we go down one more layer, we have the layer of government, and government is another layer created by man. Not the other way around as we've come to believe or become to be accustomed to be treated. It's the other way around. And during this presentation, I was pondering how simple that is, just in those three layers, and how therefore we are controlled really by labelling. Everything we deal with is a label. More so now than ever before, the gender issue is an interesting one. And so we now no longer have two genders. We have, I think, like Heinz, you have at least 57 and maybe more. It's quite extraordinary. And these things accumulate over our lives. The concept at the beginning is just a creator and man. Where does everything else come from? And so the basis of common law is the return to the sovereignty of man, not the sovereignty of government or monarchs as we would have been led to believe. And so we move on from that. He who creates controls. And this system of control has been in place for a very, very long time. It's been created and evolved over eons. So, what is law? Law is the jurisdiction of the land. The first part of the law. Law is land. The jurisdiction of air becomes the A in law, and the jurisdiction of the water becomes the water aspect. Water is maritime or corporate law, as you could see, maybe, and equally admiralty or military law. Common law is the law of the land. It can only be the law of the land. The other is a construct by others over time, as we'll see as the presentation moves forward. So common law applies to the living man and the living woman. Common law is lawful as opposed to legal. Legal is the concept of maritime law, corporate law. The living man and living woman are people as opposed to persons. Persons, again, is a construct of maritime law. We need to think of ourselves as people. We need to think of ourselves as being sovereign. We are the controllers. Common law relates to the causation of no harm, loss or injury or fraud against another living person, another living man or living woman. In the law of the land, law of the living, unwritten law, divine law, natural law, he who creates again owns. Common law knows the difference between right and wrong. As sovereign individuals, we all know the difference between right and wrong, for the most part. It's the artificial constructs that get us from by inveigling us into the maritime law system, that takes us in another direction completely. We don't trespass against another man or woman. No, we don't. Neither do we administer against another man or woman, or indeed their property. Common law, as I mentioned earlier, is lawful, holds responsible a man or a woman for trespass, causing harm, loss or injury to another man or woman. We get an administration by a jury of one's peers, rather than an independent view by a judiciary or a judge. All that belongs to a living man or woman is property. So typically a man or woman would be, their property would typically be a house, a car, even a child, none of which ultimately belong to them, or indeed us, because of the law, because of the trespass that's been performed against us from the moment that we arrived on the earth, the moment we were born, if you like. Whereupon we were unknowingly signed over to governments, service corporations, via the legal form of law. As a person, we become a tenant in our own home, even though we own it, or we think we own it, via a mortgage. A mortgage being death grip, France from mort, death, engaged grip. We are now but the registered keeper of our cars, having unknowingly assigned the ownership of the car to the DVLC. The same concept applies to our children through their registration upon arriving, through their registration upon being born, via a birth certificate. When we're born, we pass through the birth canal, a waterborne maritime law concept. The whole thing, the whole construct of the typical of the usual legal system is that of maritime. Is that of passing from into the sea, where we are lost at sea. Final note on this slide is that children should never ever be referred to as kids. Those trendy young families that talk of their kids should not be viewed should be viewed in a very strange way. Kids are the offspring of goats, who are traditionally used in sacrifice. Don't speak of your children as kids. It just brings the concept closer that we've come to, and we've been exploring this. We're accustomed to this more than ever before, quite recently. The trespass created upon us, upon our arrival, has been created over time by central bankers, queens, popes, representing the crown, monarchy and Vatican. The crown spoken of is not the crown of royalty, it's the crown of London, the crown of the city of London. It's a different entity altogether. This has been done at birth through the long form birth certificate and the rules of civil procedure. The rules of civil procedure apply from the law, the maritime law, and these are an artificial construct resulting in the newborn being raising as a dead person, a legal fiction. People know about this. The straw man, something mentioned earlier on. The straw man is of interest. Is an American view. It applies equally in the sense, but that's where the straw man comes from. It's an American construct. We get the element of legalese coming in. Legalese is Weasley words and language that we think we know, we recognise from our English dictionary. Within the legal domain, this is not what we're subject to. The legal terminology definition can be found in Black's dictionary. Black's dictionary was first developed in the back end of the 1800s. Up to 1954, it went through 4 editions. Since 1954 up to date, we are now on edition number 11 for Black's dictionary. That says something about the amount of terminology that we're having to deal with now. These are words, but not words whose meaning a living man or woman is familiar with. We all know perhaps the analogy of do you understand? Understanding is one thing to the person uttering the request, but the stand under is the joinder that we provide innocently to comply with a system unknowingly from typically police authority. I do not consent, I do not stand under you on this matter. So, upon being born, a legal fiction or person is created through a process of unlawful conversion via the birth certificate as evidence of an identity theft, giving rise to a dead person, legal fiction or straw man as mentioned previously. A dead person's name appears in all capital letters or uppercase letters as may be evidenced on the tombstones in the cemetery. It's an evidence of a dead individual. Check out the correspondence, those who may be inclined, from government authorities, banks, police, driving licenses, anything, passports, for example. The legal fiction from birth has a validity of 7 years. So after 7 years, the legal fiction ceases to become effective. However, it remains in place because nobody chooses to change it around. And so we stay with that all our lives. Our parents didn't know about it. Their parents themselves never knew about it. And we're starting now to become awakened, I think, about this. Helpful. So we'll come more to that as the presentation develops. So upon being born or arriving, a legal personal fiction is created through a process of unlawful conversion via a birth certificate that provides evidence of identity theft. You are no longer, although you identify with the name in capital letters that you see in front of you, this is a completely different entity. And if one thinks about the name sounds the same, it doesn't look the same, but the entity, the upper capital letter name resembles you, but is not you, except to those people who are administering you and your property, and indeed other aspects of your life. So this refers then to a person under maritime law. So we mentioned earlier on about the birth canal, breaking waters. There's a whole bunch of water-related descriptions that pass, that are contained within the concept of common law, or otherwise something that, there's something that we need to deal with. Come to that later. Acts, statutes and legislations all operate within the law of the water. Maritime law, all of which have nothing to do with a living man or a living woman, who are born without paper attached to them. We're born born naked, we arrive with nothing, and that the first thing that we get, that we receive from our new world, is a piece of paper, the birth certificate. And the birth certificate is typically for ships arriving at docks. And so, who administers the birth certificate to us but a dock from the hospital? There are in fact two certificates. One is the hospital registration certificate, the long form birth certificate, and the other one is the short one you take home with your newborn. So a living man is bound by no paper. This becomes attached to the process. This becomes attached to the individual by process of unlawful conversion via a birth certificate. Around 1837, the Birth, Marriages and Deaths Act was created. Created the role of Registrar General, whose responsibility it was to accumulate or coordinate and receive from all the churches around the kingdom birth certificates and such, documentation from the then population. Data mining, anybody? Data mining, we're doing the same now, big time, but with the inclusion of the DNA, the DNA testing and the sampling from that process. So we're doing another data mining. Government is actually a service corporation, acting as government. So government distracts from the true purpose of government by introducing the T at the end of the govern or the ment. We assume a different concept from it, but the thought, we've spoken earlier on about magic, a little bit about words. Legalese is full of all of that, the terminology, and so the T directs our thoughts away from men by magic. So govern, we've also got govern equals control, and then ment equals mind. So this is created, so government is created by we the people, using employees, servants of we the people, in order to protect the property of man, or we can't do that ourselves. So we assign that responsibility to a government whose duty is to do that on our behalf. Do they do that? Somewhere along the line, the role has become inverted. We the people require to return to an understanding and awareness that we are sovereign beings, created in the image of our Creator, God or Source, whichever you prefer. We are the people we've been looking for. We are not a creation of government or property. Government or property, government is a creation of we the people. The artificially created rules of civil procedure do not apply to we man. One of the things that I don't know whether I mentioned at the beginning, came across the simplicity of all of this, the capstone of the pyramid, and then within the next layer, of we the people. We live in a world of labels. We've been subsumed and overwhelmed by labels, and as a consequence, lost connection with the pinnacle, or indeed the hierarchy, or indeed our position within the hierarchy. How did it all happen? Gloria made mention earlier on about the Great Fire of London, and during that time was created the Sesquiquivir Act. The Sesquiquivir Act means evidence of life. This is the act by which the administration of the law of the sea is imposed upon us as living men and women. it was introduced in haste at the back end of the Great Fire of London. However, it goes back a bit further. The Vatican claims ownership over every corporation that has ever existed. This is done via the Crown Corporation, and this was implemented via a papal bull in 1302, claiming ownership of all souls. The papal bull is an utterance from the Pope. The papal bull was termed Unum Sanctum, meaning one holy. Unum Sanctum issued by Pope Boniface the 8th, on the 18th of November 1392. The bull laid down dogmatic propositions on the unity of the Catholic Church, the necessity of belonging to it for eternal salvation, the position of the Pope as supreme head of the Church, and the duty thence arising from submission to the Pope in order to belong to the Church and thus attain salvation. That's a Wikipedia quotation I've borrowed there. It's quite succinct, but it introduces an element of earlier history into the Act of 1666. So then we have the Great Fire of London. The Great Fire of London was a major conflagration, and I think this is, Gloria spoke in more detail of this last year, I understand. The Great Fire of London was a major conflagration that swept through central parts of London from Sunday the 2nd of September to Thursday the 6th of September in 1666. The fire gutted the medieval centre of London, inside the Roman city wall. It threatened but did not reach the city of Westminster, today's West End, Charles II's palace, or most of the suburban slums. It destroyed, however, 13,200 houses, 87 parish churches, St Paul's Cathedral, and most of the buildings in the city authorities. It is estimated to have destroyed the homes of some 70 to 80,000 inhabitants. One thing about the Fire of London was that the rebuilding cost of the Great Fire of London was in the order of then £10 million. It wasn't built to the new European standard, large boulevards and through roads. It was by and large recreated. So the £10 million rebuilding cost for London, City of London then, of the £10 million, 10%, or about £970,000, was for the rebuilding of St Paul's Cathedral itself. Prior to this, of course, London and indeed Europe, of course, had been plagued by the Black Death. And the implementation of the Sesquiquivir Act took place behind closed doors in the same 1666. Try as I might, I can't find the date of the implementation of the Act, which I find quite strange, but it was certainly commensurate with the Fire of London itself. We'll come to a bit more to that in a second. So the Act being debated then was to subrogate the rights of men and women, meaning all men and women were declared dead, lost at sea, beyond sea, and therefore operating under Admiralty law, the law of the sea. As a consequence of the Act, the state took custody of everybody in their property into a trust. The state became the trustee, or husband, holding titles to all the people and property until a living man comes back to reclaim those titles, along with damages should they choose to do so. We've mentioned this earlier, but where capital letters are used, anywhere a name appears in this format, it is always a legal entity and a legal fiction. So we get some examples there: John Doe, and then Doe chain, and we also get the inclusion of a colon as well within the construction of the name. So, cesti qui vi is evidence of life, or this is life. What cesti qui vi is actually a certificate of death because of the imposition of the uppercase characters within it. It is not about life, but that's how the inversion of these guys works. As above, so below, and the other way around, as many know here know. So this is actually not just a single act, it's an act in 3 parts. Act 1. This was formed in 1540 during the reign of Henry VIII. And we come across the word again, presumptions, under one or more of the following presumptions. That a trust be formed of persons, people, presumed wards, infants, idiots, lost or abandoned at sea, and therefore presumed dead after 7 years. So there is an elapsement of 7 years for that to apply. Whereby the poor people of England, having left their homes, goods and wealth seized in 1535 under the guise of small religious estates with a value of under £200, were granted the welfare or commonwealth. Familiar to anybody? Commonwealth benefit of the cesti qui vi, or simply an estate with which to live, under which to live, within which to work, and to bequeath via a written will. Further presumptions were added in later years. The second act was that we've spoken of in 1666. This developed and moved on the earlier act, part of which was also further hidden in 1488 under the reign of Henry VII. This permitted lords to use writs and other devices to force persons back to being compliant wards or slaves, whenever these people attempted to demonstrate their freedom. The only remedy under this act was if a person, a woman, demonstrated the waste of the lord of the property. So it means that if they discovered that the lord was being wasteful with their property, they could file a claim and to recover their property. The third act was implemented in 1741, again refining the operation of the cesti qui vi, this time as pur autre vi, meaning pure other life, under which an individual, man or woman, was knowledgeable of the act, the cesti qui vi act, could, between the ages of 18 to 20, seek to recover such property under cesti qui vi and cease then to be a slave. However, the same act also made law that after 20 years passed, the remedy for such recovery was no longer available, despite the existence of the cesti qui vi trust. And governments and banks colluding together not only obstruct knowledge of this trust, but also continue to benefit from the foundation of global banking slavery. Recognise that, anybody? So the slide in front now is simply a summation of the. You could go onto the internet and find the government acts. If you type in Cesti qui vi Act of 1666, you'll get the description that is presented to you on this particular slide. That's for what it's worth. Is legislation.gov.uk Cesti qui vi. See also, there's a wonderful article on arewereallyeducated.com with the same sort of information within it. Now, how do we deal with all of this? We come to the 12 presumptions of court. How are we for time? 5 minutes? I'll go through this, thanks, I'll go through this quickly. So the 12 presumptions of court then
So part of what we deal with, part of what's being dealt with in common law is to keep away from and out of the respective jurisdictions by those who would seek to inveigle us in them. As a caution, we need to understand fully what we're doing, or we will fall, as the hearing, as a court case moves forward. We understand, we've spoken earlier on about stand under and understand. We need to remain outside the jurisdiction of the judge. So, for example, we have several courts. It's unlikely that you become involved in an ecclesiastical or a Roman court. Equally unlikely for an admiralty military court. Maritime is another matter, and common law operates outside of maritime law and beyond and over and above maritime law. They won't like you to know that, but that's exactly where we are with that. A Roman court does not operate according to any true rule of law, but we mentioned earlier presumptions of the law. Therefore, if presumptions presented to the private bar guild, remember that for a second, are not rebutted, they become a fact, and therefore said to stand true. There are 12 key presumptions. The slides run through them all. We probably won't have time, but I'll talk about the headings thereof and introduce one or two, or insert one or two comments related to them. The Bar Guild is the British accredited register. You may recognise that from the terminology barrister. So the barrister occupies the ecclesiastical court and may even be within a military court, but certainly the maritime court. So it's the barrister who's there to administer or to represent your case, or otherwise represent your case. So the first one, public record. So the presumption of the public record is that any matter brought before a Roman court is a matter for public record, when it is in fact presumed by members of the private bar guild that the matter is a private bar guild business matter. It's their business, not yours. Unless openly rebuked and rejected by stating clearly that the matter is to be on public record. Public record is a fundamental aspect of common law, the public court. The matter remains a private bar guild pattern, completely under bar guild rules. We'll run through this quite quickly. It can be quite, so we have, first of all, public record, we have public service, we have public oath, we have immunity. These guys are immune from prosecution for themselves. We have a summons, we have custody, court of guardians, court of trustees, guild roll, false executor, incompetence. What an interesting one. The presumption of incompetence is the presumption that you are at least ignorant of the law, therefore incompetent to present yourself and argue properly. Therefore, only the judge or magistrate as executor has the right to have you arrested, detained, fined or forced into psychiatric evaluation. Again, unless the presumption is certainly challenged to the fact that you know your position as executor and beneficiary, you are sovereign, remember, and actively rebuke and object to any contrary presumption, then it stands by the time of pleading that you are incompetent. Then the judge or magistrate can do with you what they need to keep you obedient. And then finally, guilt. The presumption of guilt is the presumption that, as it is presumed to be a private business meeting of the bar guild, you are guilty whether you plead guilty or plead not guilty. Therefore, you have either previously prepared an affidavit of truth and motioned to dismiss with extreme prejudice onto the public record, remember that, or call a demurrer being an objection granting the factual basis to an opponent's point, and then dismissing it as irrelevant or invalid. The presumption is that you are guilty, and the private bar guild can hold you until a bond is prepared to guarantee the amount the guild wants to profit from you. The courts are simply places of business. designed to make money for those that are involved with them. This is a brief. Do you know? This is brief about miscellany. A bit of amusement, perhaps. Testifying. You've heard about testifying. Originating from the wise rule of Solomon, King Solomon, women were traditionally restricted in giving evidence as a consequence of their maternal or nurturing inclination. Men, on the other hand, were not so restricted. However, if it was found that they had lied on oath at court, their testicles could be removed as punishment. It's become testifying. Corona healthcare. This is a brief quote from Albert Dumas. The welfare of people, humanity, has always been the ability of tyrants, giving the servants of tyranny a good conscience. Where so is that not more evident than right now? At a site, annavonrights.com, there's a wonderful document. It's a 34-page PDF related to Justinian deception. This is the evolution of the Roman courts and how they work. I've got the links here. And then a series of links. These are available anywhere he wants them, but they've relied upon information received for the presentation from the common law courts. Many will know John Smith. Many may not know, however, work of a recently emerging site and individuals from Canada. This is the Warrior Calls. These guys are unbelievable, providing worked examples of court cases from which everybody can benefit. The essence of common law is very simple. Then we move to, there's a wonderful, the code partner of Warrior Calls is Earth United Global. And Earth United Global are about in the process of releasing a universal application that will bond everybody else together, everybody on the planet together, with the virtue of the common law. Then wonderful work also from the Bridge of Life in the Mix, and equally UK Common, who we all know. There are several more of these, but ultimately, we the people, I'm closing up now, this sigh of relief, that we the people require to return to an understanding and awareness that we are sovereign beings created in the image of our Creator. We're the people we've been looking for. We are not the creation of government. Government is our creation, the property of we the people. The artificially generated rules of civil procedure do not apply to we, the living being. Thank you for your time, Ed. Thank you for your time. Vaccination being touted to everybody. I stumbled across a part of the Irish professor, Dolores Cahill, in an interview earlier in the week, made mention that that lady had been returned to hospital the following day in critical condition. Try as I might to look at or to seek the information on that, I couldn't, other than through the presentation by Professor Doris Cahill. There are things going on that we know that we don't get hold of them. But that was a remarkable, up-to-date manifestation of where we are with the COVID vaccinations. Thanks, guys.